It started with the kind of buzzing that didn't just interrupt your morning, it tore it apart. Not the polite ding-dong of a visitor or the gentle chime of a package delivery, but a rapid, angry hammering on our gate buzzer. A machine gun rhythm of entitlement and impatience, like someone mashing every button out of sheer spite. I looked up from my coffee, heart jumping. Outside the front window, pacing like a guard dog in heels, was none other than Margaret Cartwright, our infamous HOA board member, or as most of the neighborhood called her, the Queen of Control. She wasn't just at the gate, she was performing. One hand waved in the air like she was directing traffic, while the other clutched her phone to her ear as if demanding backup. Her voice cut through the quiet like a serrated blade. "This is unacceptable. I am a board member. I have every right to inspect this property. If you do not open this gate immediately, I will be calling the authorities. This is a safety issue." I didn't have to guess who she was speaking to. She wasn't just announcing a complaint, she was issuing a threat. My wife Rachel looked up from her cup of tea, still in her pajamas, still halfway into her morning ritual. Her expression didn't shift much, just a long sigh. "Well," she said dryly, "looks like Margaret's back on her power trip." That was putting it gently. Margaret wasn't just a nuisance, she was a storm system in human form, the kind of person who saw community rules not as guidelines but as weapons, and she wielded them like a gladiator. She'd only been on the HOA board for 5 months, but in that short time she'd managed to issue more violation notices than the last 3 boards combined. Her obsession with control was legendary. She once cited a family for a lawn flamingo that was too expressive. Another neighbor got a formal warning because their kid's sidewalk chalk art was visual clutter. She fined the retired couple next door for having a bird feeder that exceeded regulation height by half an inch. Half an inch. And now, apparently, our house was next in her sights. For what? Who knew? Maybe a leaf had blown out of place. Maybe our patio furniture offended her. Or maybe, most likely, she just needed to feel in charge again. Margaret had turned our peaceful neighborhood into her personal chessboard, and every house was a piece she believed she could move. She claimed it was all about standards, about protecting property values, but really, it was about power, pure and simple. And today, it looked like she was trying to expand her reach right through our front gate. Rachel stood up and walked over to the window, her calm presence the perfect contrast to the chaos outside. Even on her extended leave from the FBI, she still moved with that quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. "She's not on the inspection schedule," she murmured, checking the HOA calendar she'd saved on her phone. "There's nothing scheduled for today. No property reviews, no meetings, not even a landscaping audit." She wasn't just guessing. Rachel had checked the schedule the night before, out of habit more than anything. Margaret had made everyone in the neighborhood just paranoid enough to track the HOA's every move. The idea that Margaret could just show up unannounced, press the buzzer like she was ordering fast food, and demand entry without cause. That wasn't just aggressive, it was illegal. And yet there she was. Margaret was still on her phone, still gesturing, now pulling out what looked like a notepad and scribbling something furiously. She wasn't just playing the part of an HOA official. She believed she was law enforcement, judge, and jury. Her car, parked sideways across 2 guest spots, was blocking anyone else from entering the visitor lot. She clearly didn't care. Rules, it seemed, only applied to everyone else. That was Margaret's trademark move. Use the rulebook like a battering ram, then act surprised when someone asked her to follow the same rules she enforced. Rachel narrowed her eyes. According to the bylaws, she's required to give 72 hours written notice before conducting any kind of inspection, and there has to be a formal complaint filed first. This isn't just overreach, it's a violation of the HOA's own charter. But to Margaret, facts were optional. She thrived on confrontation. That was her currency, and right now she was trying to cash in. I could feel the tension in the house rising, not from fear. Rachel was not someone who rattled easily, but from the sheer absurdity of the situation. A woman with zero legal authority was trying to break into private property under the guise of community oversight, and she was prepared to involve the police if we didn't let her. And the wildest part? She didn't realize she was about to call the one person who had more authority than she'd ever dreamed of, and who wasn't about to play along with her twisted little game. Margaret wasn't the type to bluff. As she stood at our gate, her voice rose a few notches louder, clearly performing for the benefit of anyone within earshot. This household is refusing a lawful inspection. I have serious concerns that something illegal is being hidden inside. I'm calling 911 right now to report suspicious behavior and a potential safety threat. Her voice had the shrill confidence of someone who thought the mere act of dialing the police gave her absolute power. She turned slightly to make sure her movements were seen, pulling out her phone with dramatic flair and tapping the screen with sharp, deliberate jabs. She was no longer just an overbearing HOA board member. She was positioning herself as the savior of the neighborhood, ready to take down the lawless residents who had dared to leave their patio umbrella open a few degrees off-center. Inside, Rachel didn't say a word at first. She calmly walked over to her side table, picked up her phone, and smiled just slightly as it lit up with an incoming call. "Oh, would you look at that?" she muttered. Margaret actually went through with it. The number on her screen was familiar: County Emergency Services. Rachel had been volunteering part-time with the 911 dispatch center during her leave, mostly to stay connected to the field while helping cover weekend shifts. The center was short-staffed, and her FBI background made her a perfect candidate to help screen calls for actual emergencies. And today, by some cosmic twist of irony, she happened to be the one on shift. Without missing a beat, Rachel answered, her tone shifting seamlessly from relaxed wife to cool professional. 911 Emergency Services, what is your emergency? She said, already knowing who would be on the other end. The voice that came through was unmistakable. Even over the phone, Margaret sounded like she was shouting through a bullhorn in a courtroom. Yes, I'm at the front of a gated residence and the homeowners are acting suspicious. They're refusing entry to a legal HOA inspection. I believe there may be unregistered construction, or worse. They're possibly hiding illegal activity. Rachel remained composed, listening intently, not interrupting once. She didn't reveal anything, no indication that she was the same woman inside the house Margaret was calling about, just quiet professionalism. Can you clarify the nature of the emergency? She asked. Is there an immediate threat to life or property? Margaret's voice sharpened even further, rising with righteous indignation. Absolutely. These people are obstructing a safety inspection. If they won't let me in, what are they hiding? This is clearly a cover-up of something serious. Rachel clicked the mute button and looked at me, her expression flat, but her eyes gleaming. She's claiming she's on a scheduled HOA inspection and that we're being hostile by not cooperating. Also, apparently, we're hiding illegal materials. Oh, and I guess we're now a safety threat to the entire neighborhood. I blinked in disbelief. Margaret had moved from fining people for mailbox paint colors to accusing residents of criminal activity. Rachel unmuted her line. Thank you, Ma'am. I need you to remain at your current location. A patrol unit will be dispatched shortly. Do not attempt to enter the property or escalate the situation. The words were delivered with absolute authority, the kind that didn't leave room for discussion. And yet Rachel already knew that Margaret wouldn't listen. She was too far gone, too committed to her delusion of power. Outside, Margaret wasn't backing down. She was now jotting notes feverishly into her clipboard while pacing in front of our gate like a security officer on a mission. A camera had appeared in her hand, and she was snapping pictures of our yard, our mailbox, the front door, the bushes, anything she could frame as a violation. To her, this was the big one, the raid, the righteous takedown of rule breakers in her carefully curated suburban empire. But the longer she paced, the more it became obvious. Margaret had no idea she'd just dialed 911 and ended up speaking directly to the woman she was targeting. She had no idea that her exaggerated claims were being documented by someone with actual legal authority, someone trained to assess threats, document false reports, and prepare cases for prosecution. This wasn't just an embarrassing misstep anymore. It was turning into a potential crime scene, and Margaret was digging her own grave, one false accusation at a time. Rachel ended the call and immediately placed another, this one direct to local enforcement. This is Special Agent Rachel Martinez, badge number 5821. I need to report an incident at my residence. A civilian has made a false emergency report and is preparing to trespass on private property under fraudulent HOA authority. She has tailgated another vehicle through a secure gate and is currently conducting what she claims is a mandatory inspection. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Her tone alone said everything. This wasn't just a petty neighbor dispute anymore. Margaret had stepped far outside the boundaries of civil discourse and was walking straight into the arms of the law. We watched as the situation outside escalated in slow motion. Margaret, growing bolder with each passing second, moved to her trunk and started pulling out more evidence. A thick manila folder full of papers that no doubt looked official to her was opened and spread across the hood of her car like she was preparing for trial. She barked into her phone, still on another call now, perhaps to another board member or, more likely, to keep her performance going. They'll see. They'll all see. I'm not backing down. This whole neighborhood is going to know what kind of rule breakers they've been protecting. It was theater, and Margaret had cast herself as the hero of a drama no one else wanted to be part of. But the truth was catching up, fast. Margaret didn't know that her call was recorded. She didn't know her accusations were documented. And she certainly didn't know that the woman inside the house she was threatening had spent the last decade building cases against people who lied under pressure and manipulated legal processes for personal power. What Margaret saw as her grand moment of glory was, in reality, the start of a legal unraveling that would strip her of the very authority she so desperately craved. And the next chapter was going to be written in handcuffs. The screech of tires came before the crash. A horrible metallic crunch followed, loud enough that birds scattered from the nearby trees. We both rushed to the front window just in time to see Margaret's car halfway through the security gate, her bumper awkwardly pressed against the back of a beige sedan. She had clearly tried to sneak in behind another resident, misjudged the timing, and collided with the vehicle in front of her. The other driver, an elderly man named Mr. Raymond, who lived a few houses down, stepped out slowly and carefully, his face a mixture of confusion and irritation. Margaret didn't even acknowledge him. She had one goal, and she was marching toward it like nothing had happened. Her clipboard was in hand, camera swinging from her neck and the oversized folder of papers tucked under her arm as she stormed up our driveway, heels clacking against the pavement like a gavel. She didn't look back once. Not at the damage, not at the man she'd hit, not even to check if her car had rolled too far forward into the bushes. No apology, no pause. Just a one-woman inspection unit, powered by rage and delusion. She reached our porch and immediately began taking pictures of our exterior, walking the perimeter like she had a legal warrant in her back pocket. This residence is in clear violation of multiple community guidelines, she announced in that unmistakable voice of authority she always adopted when she wanted to sound official. Unapproved modifications, hazardous materials, and blatant disregard for aesthetic standards. This is going straight to the board. Rachel stepped outside, door swinging open without a word. She didn't rush, didn't need to. Her FBI credentials hung around her neck, visible but not flaunted. Her posture calm, but unmistakably commanding. Margaret paused just briefly as her eyes scanned the badge, her lips parting ever so slightly in hesitation. But the hesitation didn't last. That sense of superiority, of self-declared dominion, rushed right back into her tone. I don't care what kind of badge you think you have, she snapped, chin tilted. You can't intimidate me. HOA authority supersedes individual rights within this neighborhood. I have the legal right to inspect your property for violations. Rachel didn't even blink. Actually, that's incorrect. HOA bylaws require 72 hours written notice for any inspection and only if it follows a documented complaint, none of which apply today. You are currently trespassing and, more seriously, you've just made a false 911 report. That's a criminal offense. Margaret didn't back down. She planted her feet and began snapping photos again, circling the patio as if she were gathering evidence for a courtroom drama in her head. Refusing inspection is itself a violation, she declared, spinning a narrative where she was the victim of obstruction. You people think you're above the rules, but I will not be silenced. I'm documenting everything. This property is going on record for non-compliance and possible legal escalation. Rachel moved slightly forward, her body now clearly between Margaret and our front door. You've already tailgated through a secure gate, damaged a vehicle, and ignored multiple legal boundaries. I'm instructing you one final time to leave this property immediately. Patrol units are on their way. If you continue to trespass, you'll be charged accordingly." That was the moment the sirens became audible, first faint, then growing louder by the second. The sound cut through the air like a warning bell. Margaret heard them too, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she spun around, adjusted her stance, and raised her voice again. "Officers, over here," she called, waving her clipboard like a flag. "Thank goodness you've arrived. These residents are uncooperative, hostile, and I have reason to believe they're concealing illegal structures or substances. I've been attempting a lawful inspection under HOA protocol and was met with threats." She painted the picture like she always did, turning herself into a noble victim, the lone figure trying to restore order in a community spiraling into chaos. To an outsider, it might have sounded halfway believable, but to those who'd lived here, who'd experienced months of her antics, it was just Margaret's latest act in her never-ending play. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, and parked with practiced efficiency behind her vehicle. The lead officer, a tall woman with a steely expression and sergeant stripes, stepped out first, taking in the scene. Her eyes moved quickly from Margaret to Rachel, then to the clipboard, then to the house. It didn't take her long to assess who was who in this situation. "Ma'am," she said, turning to Margaret, "I need to see some identification, and I'd like you to step away from the residence while we assess the situation." Margaret puffed up. "I'm Margaret Cartwright, HOA board member. I was performing a scheduled inspection when these people became aggressive and attempted to block me from enforcing the rules." She handed over her license with exaggerated politeness, then immediately began recounting her version of events, full of embellished threats and imaginary hostility. Meanwhile, the second officer had moved toward Mr. Raymond to take a statement about the fender bender at the gate. His expression was calm but firm as he recounted how Margaret had rammed into his car and just kept driving. The sergeant approached Rachel next. The conversation between them was quiet, professional. Rachel showed her credentials, provided the HOA bylaw documents, a copy of the inspection calendar, and, crucially, a full report of Margaret's 911 call. The sergeant listened closely, occasionally nodding, flipping through the documentation. After a few moments, she returned to Margaret with a very different tone. "Miss Cartwright," she said, "I've reviewed the 911 call you made earlier. In that call, you reported criminal activity and a threat to community safety. However, we have documentation that no inspection was scheduled, no violation was filed, and you were not authorized to access this property." Margaret's face began to change. Her bravado cracked slightly, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But she wasn't ready to admit defeat. "That's ridiculous. Board members have inspection rights. This is an organized cover-up. You're all being fooled by someone impersonating a federal agent." The sergeant didn't respond to the rant. She simply signaled her partner. "Ma'am, you need to turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for trespassing, filing a false emergency report, and leaving the scene of an accident." The shift in Margaret's posture was immediate. Her eyes widened in disbelief, her mouth opened in protest. "You can't arrest me. I'm on the board. I'm enforcing rules." But the cuffs were already on. Her attempts to twist the truth, to weaponize the HOA, to involve the police as her personal enforcement team, all of it collapsed in that single moment. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with made-up violations and authoritarian tactics was now standing on the sidewalk in handcuffs as her fantasy of control dissolved into cold, hard reality, and the very system she tried to manipulate had finally turned on her. Margaret's protests rang out across the street as the officers guided her toward the patrol car. Her voice, usually cold and calculated, was now panicked and cracking with disbelief. "This is harassment. I'm being arrested for doing my job. I'll sue every last one of you. The HOA board will have your badges." Her once authoritative stride was replaced by stumbling resistance, her confidence melting away under the weight of real consequences. Neighbors began to emerge, slowly at first, just curious glances from behind curtains and half-open doors, but then in growing numbers. Word had spread fast. Margaret's reign had been the backdrop of countless neighborhood whispers and quiet frustrations for months. People who had tiptoed around their own homes out of fear of receiving a notice for having a wind chime that was too noisy, or a recycling bin placed 3 inches off the designated spot, were now watching the self-proclaimed enforcer finally face the music. Mrs. Ellis from 2 doors down, a sweet woman in her 70s who had received a warning for having non-conforming potted plants, stood on her porch in stunned silence. The young couple at the end of the cul-de-sac, who once considered moving after being fined for having children's toys visible from the sidewalk, exchanged relieved looks. And Mr. Raymond, still holding his coffee and shaking his head, chuckled softly as he watched the scene unfold, probably replaying the absurd moment Margaret's bumper met his trunk. Rachel walked calmly to the lead officer and handed over a thick folder. This includes prior documentation, multiple resident complaints, abuse of board authority, attempts to enforce rules without procedure, and several instances of targeted harassment. We compiled everything 2 weeks ago, anticipating that she might escalate again. The officer flipped through the pages, her face growing more serious with each turn. 15 households have signed formal complaints, Rachel continued. Some were suppressed by Margaret using her board position. She even threatened legal retaliation if anyone brought it up at HOA meetings. There was no smugness in Rachel's voice, no gloating, just a quiet sense of duty. She wasn't celebrating Margaret's downfall, she was ensuring that justice had the paperwork to stick. As Margaret was secured in the back of the patrol car, still shrieking about legal action and conspiracies, neighbors began gathering in small, relieved clusters, finally sharing their Margaret horror stories aloud. The repression had lifted. It felt like a dam had broken. People laughed, vented, even cried. One resident admitted she'd stopped decorating for holidays because Margaret once sent a violation notice over a string of lights. Another had installed security cameras not to protect from crime, but to defend against unauthorized inspections. By mid-afternoon, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer, like a shadow had been cast off the community in a single morning. That evening, the HOA president, Janet Morrison, called Rachel directly. She sounded tired, shaken, and above all, embarrassed. "We're calling an emergency board meeting. Effective immediately, Margaret has been suspended pending resolution of the charges. We'll be reviewing all the violation notices she issued and the procedures she circumvented. We owe the neighborhood an apology and a better system." Janet admitted that Margaret had come across as professional and knowledgeable when she first joined. She'd presented fake documents that looked like official guidelines and claimed she had years of HOA experience. In hindsight, it was all smoke and mirrors. No one had ever verified her background, no one questioned her confidence, until it was too late. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Margaret's story spread beyond the neighborhood. A local news outlet caught wind of her arrest and began investigating. What they discovered was staggering. Margaret had pulled similar stunts in at least 3 other communities. She had joined HOA boards in different counties, used her role to create fear, and when challenged, had escalated with false reports, threats, and aggressive inspections. In one neighborhood, she tried to evict a family for painting their shutters the wrong shade of gray. In another, she attempted to have a teenager cited for parking his bike too close to a sidewalk. It wasn't just overreach, it was a pattern of behavior, calculated and dangerous. Detective Lewis, the lead investigator assigned to her case, contacted Rachel the following week. "We ran her name through the system," he explained. "Turns out she has outstanding complaints in several counties. A few are civil, but others are criminal, false reporting, harassment, even impersonating a government official." The charges were stacking up fast. The district attorney had already moved to consolidate cases, building what was now being considered a high-profile example of community-level abuse of power. Margaret's plea deal fell apart. Prosecutors had no interest in leniency once the scope of her behavior became clear. She faced multiple charges: false emergency reporting, trespassing on federal property, harassment, destruction of property, and misuse of her elected position. Meanwhile, our neighborhood underwent a transformation. The HOA enacted immediate changes. All inspections now required board approval, 72-hour notice, and a third-party witness. Background checks for board candidates became mandatory, and a new subcommittee was formed to handle resident concerns without fear of retaliation. Violations issued by Margaret were reviewed and, in most cases, dismissed. Residents who had spent hundreds on unnecessary modifications were reimbursed through a special fund. A garden that had once been a source of contention, led by the ever-patient Mrs. Ellis, was approved and planted in the community common area. Her once offending potted plants were now proudly displayed, complete with a small plaque that read, "In bloom, in peace." The most poetic moment came when Margaret, as part of her sentencing, was ordered to write formal apologies to the residents she had targeted. The letters arrived, each clearly written by a lawyer, devoid of genuine remorse but nonetheless an admission of wrongdoing. "I regret that my actions caused unnecessary distress," one letter began. "My interpretation of community guidelines was incorrect," another stated. For the first time, the very people she tried to control had written evidence of her misconduct, and the power she clung to so tightly had been stripped away by her own hand. Rachel returned to her FBI work, though she remained a quiet legend at the dispatch center. Her case was used in training modules, a textbook example of how authority, real or imagined, can be abused, and how calm, lawful response can dismantle even the most aggressive power trips. Our community settled into a new rhythm. The lawns were still tidy, but no longer inspected by binoculars. Children's toys reappeared on driveways. Wind chimes sang freely. People waved at each other again, unburdened by paranoia. The patio furniture Margaret once deemed aesthetic pollution remained exactly where it had always been, untouched, unbothered, proof that peace doesn't come from control, it comes from respect. And sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe or hold a gavel. Sometimes it drinks cold coffee on the porch, smiles at a quiet sunset, and lets the world right itself naturally, one exposed tyrant at a time.